the Strait of Hormuz. Once again, in the past few hours, the Trump administration has been, unsurprisingly, sending mixed signals around its intentions to perhaps return to trying to implement Project Freedom, which was obviously attemptedly instigated on Monday. But there's also been discussions that peace talks seem to be making progress. So on the one hand, Trump's suggesting peace, but on the other, he's also threatening renewed military action, naval action over the Strait of Hormuz. Now, is that just the incredible strategic planning of Donald Trump and his administration, or is it simply a reflection of what they usually do, which is try to carry a stick whilst offering a carrot? Well, to join me to make sense of this is ALEXANDRU, who is from Romania, but is also an expert on maritime security, exercise, and war gaming as well. Now, ALEXANDRU, it's lovely to meet you. And we were chatting. We were chatting on offline a little bit before coming on air about sort of the extent to which this is, what a return to sort of what has been going on for much of April. But is there anything different to this time around? What's your assessment of the current state of maritime security or insecurity in the Strait of Hormuz right now?
Call me an optimist or paint me an optimist, but I think the fact that US tried to push those two ships through the Strait of Hormuz nudged a bit the negotiation table, which was fairly square between the two actors, and discussions were not really budging. Discussions actually bogged down, and nobody was actually moving along. So I think US managed to nudge a bit the discussion on that area with that situation. The thing is, Iran, for the best part of this conflict, said clearly they will not want to leave the Strait of Hormuz from their control, because in the absence of that, I think they have to deal directly with the nuclear file, which US wants and has been following for a long while now, past administration. So it's not just the Trump administration that wanted this case solved, the nuclear file of Iran, but it's for sure President Trump wants to do it faster than everybody else, and in a way that it can prove a better deal maker than the administrations before. So in that respect, I think that situation, let's say, of one day of the Project Freedom episode, let's say, which is now suspended, managed to show to the Iranians that US is willing to go all the way, and they are willing, in the right conditions, let's say, that they are willing to take the cost of trying to brute force the Strait of Hormuz. Albeit, if you look at the numbers of ships inside, which is roughly 1,500 ships blocked, getting them out 2 by 2 out, it will take a while. Obviously, US is not planning to do that. That would be ridiculous. But it wanted to show and signal to the US it wanted to signal to the Iranian side that they are willing to go all the way and try to basically peel or chip this monolithic control that the Iranian tried to hold on Hormuz Strait. So I think that would be the main key or the main takeaway of the past few days. On the side of Iran, it's more or less more of the same. We know they cannot really attack US on the same terms like US is attacking Iran, so they decided the strategy of third-party attacking would be the strategy they will take during the conflict phase, and as a response to US managing to push those two ships to the Strait.
Well, in the past hour, even half an hour, there's been different reports as well. One coming from the Wall Street Journal, just reading here, that the opening of Saudi and Kuwaiti air bases is going to occur, which is now part of Trump wanting to restart Project Freedom. It came after the quite big revelations in the past hours about Saudi Arabia basically closing off its airspace or closing off the ability for the Americans to make use of their assets there. So, what does that do to the calculus for the United States, but also Iran? Could we see Iran like retaliating against Saudi Arabia and Kuwait for doing this move?
I mean, looking at how things happened, Iran preferred to probably strike territories closer to home just to reduce the chance for interception. Saudi has what would you call strategic depth. It's a large country, so it could basically defend better against attacks from Iran if that would happen, if that would be the case. But we've seen that Iran concentrated a lot of its strike retaliatory force, let's say, on United Arab Emirates, on the UAE, and also Bahrain, Kuwait, and so on. So closer to home, I would dare to say, closer to the territory of Iran, just to probably reduce the reaction time from these retaliatory attacks. But that's not out of the case. Iran has continuously stated that states that will somehow allow US to carry on or carry out their attacks would be considered in their eyes at least aiding and abetting rather than necessary combatants. And there are reports and statements from Iranian side that they consider UAE to be one of those states that can be considered belligerent in their eyes, in the eyes of Iranians. So the thing is, even if airspace of these states would not be allowed to US for ABOs, for air flight, US can still get the airplanes through the Strait, which is considered international airspace. So basically, they can use that corridor. Obviously, this will limit US's ability to protect that particular type of aircrafts, and especially the tankers, which would want to stay further away from the actual theater of war, just for standoff safety. But that doesn't mean US will have. It will limit the US ability to carry out Project Freedom for sure, but I would dare to say not necessarily block it, even in the absence of overflight across some of these countries in the Gulf.
Now, one of the things that's been obviously happening over the past few days after the miscalculation on Monday involving what was claimed to be strikes on US Navy assets, and then there wasn't, and it was an effective walkback by the IAGC, has been a particularly intense set of targeting on the United Arab Emirates. I made a video yesterday about what the Emiratis are doing by leaving OPEC and why it's not quite what we might think in some ways. But what do you think of the Iranians' behavior over that? Is it they're targeting the Emiratis because they're one of the most clear partners to the Americans? But if so, why not also target the Saudis or Kuwaitis, if they're called the Kuwaitis?
I would not be able to go into the politics of this, or at least the optics of why Iran is targeting specifically UAE versus others, if that's the case. There are, as I said, there are reports in which Iranian officials mentioned UAE specifically as being seen more of a belligerent state rather than just one of the other Gulf states. And for that reason only, I think Iranian will target. But I dare to say it has to do also with the proximity of territory, which leaves little or at least less time to reacting for this type of attacks, especially when you consider ballistic missiles, which are fairly fast compared to cruise missiles, and especially fast compared to drones, to aerial drones. So it might be an issue or combination of tactics and specific optics that Iran is considering when looking at UAE. And I think it's more or less that. It's a combination of that. And it's just a matter of perspective on Iranian regarding this particular state in the Gulf, and probably opportunity of targeting. Also, we know Fujairah was used as a bypass for UAE's oil, because they have that pipeline that crosses east-west basically, and Fujairah is outside of the actual strait. Now with the two lines that Iranian claim to be the limits east-west of the territory they want to control, and those lines were passing north, basically on the entirety of the strait. Fujairah now is part of that area that Iran is claiming control on. We know US passed ships there and actually went in the strait, pulled two ships, one of them from Maersk, both of them under US flag. Maersk came out with an official statement that their ship was pulled out of the strait in conditions of safety. Iranians attacked that particular convoy. US repelled it consistently. And I think in desperation, I dare to say in desperation, or at least in frustration, if not in desperation, they resorted to their practice, to their strategy during the active conflict, that is attacking third parties, especially UAE in this case, but also on Oman. Some fires on Oman as well. Some weapons were launched.
What I think is rather difficult for some people to grasp is just how international maritime works, though, as well, because there's falsified information that the Strait of Hormuz is Iranian and Omani, which is not the case under the UN Charter of the Sea, Law of the Sea from 1980. You know, it's pretty clear that it's seen as an international waterway and therefore freely accessible, free right of passage for everyone. Can you explain the misconceptions over the Strait of Hormuz and why it isn't as people think it is?
I think we could take the time to explain maybe three concepts here. First, I would like to touch on the idea of sea blindness, which is this logic of people working in the maritime, albeit law enforcement, navy, or actual commercial shipping, that non-professionals do not really understand the sea and do not really understand the implications of the sea. There is a rule I usually use, is the 70-80-90 rule. 70% of the surface of the earth is water, out of which a big part is seas and oceans, obviously. Then 80% of the population lives roughly under 200 kilometers from a water body, albeit rivers, lakes, or oceans and seas, and roughly 60% actually to big bodies of water like oceans and seas. And then 90% of whatever is shipped around the world has a maritime segment. So basically, almost everything that you own, everything that you buy, everything that you see around you has been shipped, including data. So communication satellite are a thing, but 95% at any given moment, towards 99% of the data transmissions actually happen with submarine cables. And those pass through international waters and national waters and so on and so forth. So that's one, sea blindness, which is a concept, and it's impacting also policymakers. So governance is done by a lot of people that don't really have a feeling for what the sea is. Okay. The second thing we should discuss is the juridical regime of bodies of water. And there you have two bodies of law. First of all is the customary law, and then you have the UNCLOS, which is the United Nations Law of the Sea, okay, Convention on the Law of the Sea, which was one of the highest negotiated body of international law. It took, I think, 5 conventions on the span of 35 plus years, was adopted finally roughly in the 86 or something like that, but came in force basically in 96 with the 60th state that sent the ratification instruments to the UN. That is the 60th state that signed and then ratified in national law the convention. Iran is a signatory of UNCLOS, but not a ratifier. So that means they signed the convention, but they never implemented it as a national law. US, on the other side, is not a signatory, but both of them arguably respected by customs. That is, in international law, if you respect a rule, even if you're not a signatory of that rule, you can be claiming that you respect it and you can be treated as respecting it. So Iran now comes and say, no, we don't really respect. So in this body of law in UNCLOS, they establish 2 rules of passage for international waters. First one is called innocent passage, and this was customary. This was before the actual UNCLOS was treated, and they have enshrined it, they have written it down in the UNCLOS for historical purposes and for application purposes, because a lot of states came from that. That means ships can pass through waters of a state, even national waters of a state, territorial waters, for as long as they have innocent purpose. That means they don't pose a threat to the state itself. And that was before the UNCLOS. Now, UNCLOS said, because of abuses of innocent passage not being written down nowhere, and being, whenever you don't write a rule down, people have different interpretation of it. Even when it's written down, they have different interpretation of it. When it's just by habit, by custom respected, the custom changes from place to place. Okay, so in the UNCLOS, they introduce what they call transit passage, and especially for bodies of waters which depend on one type of strait, like you'd have Baltic Sea with the Danish Straits, like you'd have Gibraltar, like you'd have Suez, like you'd have Panama. Okay, when Suez and Panama, mind you, are artificial passageway, and I'm going to explain the difference between taxes for navigational services and whatever Iran is trying to implement in the Strait. Okay, so in this logic of transit passage, they clarified the rule and the law, the right of ships, especially commercial shipping, to pass through international waters, even if they are overlapping national waters, like is the case of the Strait of Hormuz. So Strait of Hormuz, because it doesn't have the necessary width, there's no international waters. It's territorial waters of Oman, territorial waters of Iran. But in the sense of commercial shipping, they are considered an international strait. And in that case, you have this application of transit passage in which you cannot interfere with the transit of ships unless they do something to you or they are of your flag. You are, countries joined UNCLOS just for the right of their ships under their own flags to not be searched and boarded by other countries across the world. That was the only benefit for the states to leave this body of regulation, international regulation, under the logic of freedom. Because most legislation in the world is negotiated under the logic of control, of sovereignty. You want more control through rules. UNCLOS is about zero control. UNCLOS is a body of regulation that puts rules for freedoms. My ships under my flag can sail the world and no state can interfere with them unless those ships call a port of that state. So you can go through the territorial water of a state, and if you don't go into a port of a state, that state should not interfere.
But now that we have been in this situation for the best part of 6 weeks, and the Iranians have put almost all emphasis on the Strait of Hormuz as the biggest pressure point, the asymmetry, some people call it, to target the US, to undermine the Trump administration's military and political strategies here. What does that mean for the interpretation of maritime law and security? You know, the Strait of Hormuz is tiny; it's very narrow. So people are saying it just has to be treated as like an artificial waterway now, and we're going to see a toll eventually. Is that complete nonsense then?
Then this is what I was going to reach. The type of fares, I would call them, or fees that you have in some specific bodies of water are related with navigational services. For example, in the Suez Canal, which is very narrow, you need to have on board a specialized staff called a pilot that will help you guide the ship through the strait so that you're not blocking it by mistake. And you have to pay for that service. So you are not impeding, you're not, the administration of the canal cannot stop your ships to go through, but they can ask you to pay for the services of passing safely through. Safety, not security. Okay, safety has to do with non-man-made or non-intentional accidents. Okay, while security in the maritime law has to do with intention. What Iran is doing is trying to instrument the strait for own benefit. It's basically blackmailing or tolling, and this is, by any understanding of international law, not okay and highly illegal, highly irregular, let's call it. Now, what the situation now is doing is the third thing I was going to point out, and it's something I've been mentioning for a while. It's what I like to call the tokenization of maritime security. And we've seen it in Bab el-Mandeb, and we've seen that the Houthis there, okay, a non-state armed group, basically a small group, managed to get a ceasefire with US. Okay, and it's something that hasn't happened in the recent history, or at least in known history, to that level of importance. So if a non-state armed group managed to bring the whole world at the table during the Bab el-Mandeb situation, November 24 until November 23 until November 25, when they got a ceasefire negotiated with US, imagine what that can do for a state actor that will implement the same blueprint. And I've mentioned at that point that this is something of that shifts massively the understanding of maritime security, because the Houthis back then arrested basically maritime security and the shipping of everybody for a completely disconnected purpose, for a power play. Back then, mentioning the fact that whoever was going to join or help Israel for whatever reason, again, a very broad definition of targeting, will get basically their ships blown up out of the water. And we have to understand that just having the flag of a state, that doesn't mean the state has too much dealing with you as a ship. You are owned by a company. You have a flag, so you have the jurisdiction of the flag, but then you have the control of the owner. You have the control of the operator. Then you have, I don't know how many nationalities of the crew on the ship itself, and then you also have the merchandise, which is completely disconnected. So you have 5-6 jurisdiction on a ship at any given moment. Imagine how easy it is for somebody that just gets a broad definition of what helping your enemy means, that you can get randomly targeted, basically. And this is what we've seen during the Bab el-Mandeb situation for 2 years. And I don't think the world learned too much at that point. But now we see the same blueprint applied in an even narrower strait of water, and more importantly, in a cul-de-sac type sea. So there's no workaround. Bab el-Mandeb had the workaround, the south of Africa, the Cape of Good Hope. There's no workaround maritime-wise for the Strait of Hormuz. And it's also a state actor that applies this pressure. And we see the effect. So I'm pretty sure a lot of the actors out there are watching now and see ways to pressure their points, their power plays, by instrumenting and tokenizing maritime security. Because right now, Iran is not just forcing US to react, it's basically forcing the entire world to react. It arrested the entire world.
So you don't think that the visual images and maps that have shown simply digging a new trench through the UAE and Oman are realistic? No, they're a little bit unrealistic. Okay, I thought that was a viable solution there, Alex.
I think in 10 years that would be a viable solution. The problem is everybody's hoping that this thing will fix in 1 year. Who's going to invest billions of dollars for a project that will end up in 10 years to be solved? While it's easier to build pipes, first of all, that also take a few years, but it's cheaper to build the pipelines, and at the same time, it's cheaper to find the solution diplomatically.
Well, I mean, the Qataris and the Emiratis are used to hiring foreign labor for questionable reasons, to say build some stadiums for a World Cup here or there. Some maybe human rights are not the highest, but maybe we could get some more of them to dig a trench. So I'm being slightly inappropriate there, but no, I just think it's absolutely insane, some of the suggestions that people have put forward on social media.
One of the craziest suggestions was to just basically use trucks to ship oil across the strait. First of all, you have to understand that the truck probably holds something like, I don't know, maybe 200 barrels, maybe let's say 500 barrels per truck, okay? Imagine that one single VLCC, the very large crude carriers, hold 2 million barrels.
The math isn't mathing there, is it?
The math isn't mathing, because you're pushing out something like 20 billion barrels per day. That's roughly 5 VLCC worth of 10 VLCC worth of oil. I don't know how many trucks we have now in the world, but I'm pretty sure we're going to consume the whole reserve of trucks in the world just to do that. The second thing is, oil is not the only thing that comes out of this strait. You have natural gas liquefied, and there's no workaround right now for that. So oil, Saudi Arabia has a pipeline, some of it goes out. UAE has a pipeline, some of it goes out. But for LNG, there's no way around right now, unless somebody starts building a pipeline anytime soon. And liquefaction factories on the other side of the pipeline, so because that's an issue. Then you have sulfur, which will not leave the region anytime soon. And then you have fertilizer based on LNG production. So unless you produce LNG, you're not producing fertilizers, and those are not leaving the area now. And we're in full planting season for rice, and rice crops will go down immensely. India is suffering from that, and India is one of the main producers of rice in the world, and rice is a staple for easily 2 billion people on the planet. We're not talking even corn and others, so that's a different discussion for and gray and wheat. And then you also have helium, and 30% of the helium production is done here, and helium is a mandatory supply for high tech, computer chips production, medicine, and so on. And on top of that, you have naphtha. And naphtha is the basis for any type of plastics. There's no modern industry or life without plastics. And 30% of, roughly 20-30% of naphtha supply in the world comes from here. You already have a lot of news coming from hospitals in Japan saying they no longer have latex gloves and stuff. The price for plastics went up. Small businesses in South Korea, in the first 3 weeks after the Strait of Hormuz closed, went bankrupt because of lack of plastic. So you have all these chains, and these are basic elements for modern industry. So we haven't yet felt the entire effects of the Strait closing. Barely now we start feeling it. After 60, 70 days, in my opinion, we'll start feeling the whole effect. And for every 1 week that adds now, the markets will become more and more sensitive, basically.
I didn't know the intricacies of what kind of resources, materials, and such go through there. That's I mean, it's all emphasis is on oil, then secondary gas, which has obviously been seen a huge reduction with the Qataris shutting it off. But certainly helium. Wow, very interesting. So what would the reintroduction, the reactivation, although I'd never really feel like it got off the ground, would be the implications of Project Freedom if the United States, if the Trump administration were to actually try to implement Project Freedom? How, firstly, would that work, and two, what implications would it mean?
We've seen how it works. Basically, they need to put aircrafts on the surface across the Gulf waters, basically. And because there's no air contestation, there's no really counter air from Iran, these helicopters run amok. Basically, they're gonna just chase down any type of those speedboats. The issue here is that you need to pass these ships through the strait and pass them back, and you need to also escort what you'd call goalkeeping. Basically, you put these air defense destroyers, but very close to the ships that you're passing. So you do this one-on-one transit, and every time you're gonna go through the strait, you're gonna put yourself in a situation like that. And these mosquito fleets that Iran is using, they have the potential to overwhelm. I'm not saying that it's necessarily happening or it will happen, but they do have the potential to overwhelm if the number is sufficiently high. But as I said, a big advantage is for US is there's no air contestation. So Apache helicopters and Seahawk helicopters can just run amok, hunt these ships down. But you still have the problem of cruise missiles and drones. For this, the Arleigh Bursts are more or less well endowed, let's say, to counter them, because they are air defense destroyers as base platforms and strike capability. But the cost will be expensive. The cost will be big. And also the political cost is huge in case one of these ships gets hit, because then it's bragging rights for Iran all the way. And I'm pretty sure the appetite of Trump's electoral base is not really that big to lose people on the sea against Iran. So the tactics of it, we've seen it already. It happened at least once. The implications or the aftermath is something that we need to be careful, because Iran showed that they understand that losing Strait of Hormuz control, getting chipped away one by one like this, means they lose negotiating power. And they will react exactly like we've seen. They will just launch missiles at states, indiscriminately at states in the Gulf. And I'm not sure how much punishment everybody is willing to take in that sense. These countries went through a huge pressure during 1 month of conflict, more than 40 days of conflict, let's say, in which attacks were launched daily, especially basically daily, okay, against all these countries here, with no exception. And we're talking thousands of projectiles. We're talking thousands of missiles and drones in total across the region. So that will happen. The second is Iran can always start threatening the submarine cables, which they haven't yet. And those cables pass through the Strait, and a lot of the network infrastructure depend on the connectivity that those cables support. So that would be another. Then the Bab el Mandeb comes into play. And for that, there is a solution. Okay, we had Prosperity Guardian operation, so basically US knows what to do there in order to solve it more or less, or at least fix it or keep it under control. But you see, the reaction against the states in the region will be indiscriminate, and that in turn will probably create some level of pressure on US to solve it in a way or another. So it's all about the appetite of the entire region to take this on as a whole. And I'm not sure exactly, I would not be able to tell you exactly what the states are thinking or considering in this respect. For sure, from a purely military perspective, without considering anything else, it can be done. And I've said this from the very beginning, since the very first question I've got on this subject. Yes, it can be done, but the cost itself is something that needs to be calculated. And the cost is not necessarily the military cost, is rather the political cost or the image cost and the optics of it. We've seen already how.
But if the Americans go through with it, if the Trump administration go through with it, what can Iran do? Do they have a navy? What other assets do they have that they can leverage? Could they just target any and all other countries, any and other all bases of the Americans? Like, the Iranians are fighting for their survival here, whilst Trump's just doing it for his ego. So, you know, I've talked with a lot of people about the broader escalation trap of this, the escalation ladder and cycles. How worse can this go if the Trump administration just decides, screw it, I just want to do it, much like he just decided to launch this entire war? What are the ramifications from this?
I think the Iranians passed the point of trying to paint this as a survival war, because let's look at the fact that decapitation happened. The regime more or less reset itself on the same lines of logic, and they haven't been yet again targeted, because it takes a while to build that level of targeting, so in order to catch the entire new leadership of Iran right now. And I think that's off the table. So I think the idea of Iran is fighting for its survival right now is just inflated. That was maybe in the first 2 weeks, where you had seen in motion what I would call the cold hand system of Iran, which is the mosaic defense doctrine, in which my estimation is that for a couple of weeks, those 31 regional military commands just shut down any communication with the outside, pulled out pre-written orders, and randomly started, based on those orders, attacking in retaliation, just to not give that window of opportunity for a system to be reset in Iran. Because a decapitation move of that level that happened in the first few days would have normally, under normal assumption conditions, would have blocked the command and control system of the military in Iran or other state in the same situation. But Iran has been reinforcing against this particular scenario, and the answer was that mosaic defense doctrine, in which these 31 semi-autonomous territorial commands basically went and entered in autonomous mode, and until the new command and control, until the new chain of command was established, they just basically executed predefined orders. And you had that confusion. If you remember, the foreign minister was coming and saying, we're not going to attack states in the region, and 1 hour later everybody got attacked again. And that decoupling, it's where I think it was the doctrine at work, basically.
Okay, interesting. So I guess to end on simply, where do you see this going? How bad could this get? How intense could this get before we see a committed effort to find a solution, not just to the Strait of Hormuz, but to a deal. But of course, what does the resolution of the Strait of Hormuz, of the maritime security in this part of the world look like? And is it fundamentally different to what it was before February 28th?
I think the scarier subject is not what escalation can happen now, for as long as after the escalation a deal will be reached. I think the scarier scenario is not no deal is reached and this becomes a frozen new status quo in which Iran just basically arrested the entire world, and this area here becomes a broken sea from the global system, basically decoupled. And then it continues to be so understood for a longer period of time and basically becomes this new status quo, and nobody's going to be able to remove it. So I think the issue here is how the architecture of this region will look, the maritime security architecture of this region will look. And I think a sustainable and durable situation, post-war situation, will have to involve the region more than anything, and has to be owned in the region especially. And I think for a period of time, maybe a multinational force to act as a form of, I know, confidence building in the region, in which I think US should not be part of, Iran should not be part of, or at least both should be part of. So either both belligerents are part of, or they are both not part of, because nobody trusts this situation anymore. Iran opened the strait for a while, 20 hours, everybody bulked up to exit, and they got shot on. Then US opened the idea of Project Freedom, 36 hours later, it got suspended. So the trust which I feel that the maritime industry has in these two actors right now, it's at minus 5,000, not zero. So unless some new faces populate the waters there and guarantee more or less that these two actors are behaving as they should or how they've agreed on, I think it will be, I know it will be hard. But I think the risky and the nightmarish scenario will be for this to become a frozen situation in which Iran holds full control of the strait and basically keeps the entire region at gunpoint, and the entire world will just stay and linger and do nothing. At the same time, I think the Strait of Hormuz itself being blocked is a ticking time bomb on Iran's hand, especially if the world will rally and come with a neutral third party in the region, because I think the appetite to fire against other people's ships, especially other navies' ships, is actually not that high. US is a belligerent, so the appetite exists there because it's an open conflict, and it's more or less understood that in conflict, belligerent fight. But bringing a neutral fleet in the region, in which you'd have Chinese vessels, Pakistani vessels, Indian, whatever, Southeast Asian nations, European nations, I think the calculus will change a bit for IRGC, sorry.
Okay, well, Alexandru Christian, it's been an absolute pleasure hosting you. That's a bit of an ominous point by which to end on, but seems like we're only going in this direction right now of continued uncertainty, continued impulsivity. I think a large proportion of it depends on what the Trump administration, what Trump just feels like on a daily basis. From what I understand, the Iranians are reviewing their proposal, the counter proposal. We're basically back to where we were a few weeks ago. But, you know, one would like to wake up and this entire thing is ended, albeit the implications from it, I think, are only just beginning. But thank you very much for your time, everyone, for watching. Do subscribe, do follow Alex's work. You can find him across the internet, including on Al Jazeera. And we'll be sure to have you back in the near future to take stock of what's going on or not. But everyone, yeah, thanks for watching. Subscribe.